play. And another foul on board. His third for setting a screen.
Because of physical play, although Jordan Taylor just got caught with a moving screen.
Pick and roll. And a foul. Offensive foul coming up. Ken Valentine standing right there.
Izzo dying for a moving screen.
Welcome, everybody, to another edition of the Moving Screen Podcast. It's always good when we have news to talk about because then we have an excuse to record a podcast. So
you could also say it's always good when the news comes before we record a podcast because we've had some issues with that.
it's a great point. So it is currently 2:45 on Tuesday afternoon, May 19th. I've cracked a beer. Dylan has not, but
I'm still on the coffee.
Still on the coffee. I'd get jittery if I had coffee this late. But, yeah, Michigan picking up a commitment this afternoon from Chaundee Brown. It's technically Chaundee Brown Jr. per the transfer portal, but he doesn't use the junior, so I don't know. That's something to watch out for. A Wake Forest transfer. I think a pretty good get for Michigan. We're going to get into the fit. We're going to get into the roster implications. We'll touch on Nojel Eastern and go from there. First, we would encourage everyone out there to please subscribe to both of our respective sites. I currently have my story on Chaundee Brown on The Athletic. You can find that with some source information and how I think he will fit on the team, what he brings, blah, blah, blah. Dylan, as always, has a great video breakdown of Chaundee Brown looking inside the numbers, breaking down some tape. Anything else you want to touch on, Dylan?
Yeah, we're also going to have a couple other Chaundee Brown stories coming up. We'll have some more stuff just getting into his game, some people that have seen him play a lot and what they think of him. So we're going to have that coming up soon, probably by the time you hear this podcast. So also stay tuned for that.
Nice. Very good. Okay, so let's get into it. First of all, we'll break down Brown's game. We touched on him on the last pod if you missed that, but we'll kind of review some things. 6'5", kind of a hybrid four-man in a wings body, strong, right? Listed at 220, certainly looks it. Big arms, big shoulders, well built, likes to bang, can play into contact. Dylan, why don't you kind of break down his offensive offering?
I think we said on one of these podcasts recently that Juwan Howard has a type. He likes strong wings who can play multiple positions, and he clearly values that toughness. I think you could lump Chaundee Brown into that same category. I call him a power guard, really. His game is really well suited to play off the ball, but he's strong enough that he can guard fours if you need him in a pinch. He's not a guy who's going to step in and run a bunch of ball screens. Wake Forest was a pretty heavy ball screen offense last year, and I think he was fourth or fifth in terms of ball screen volume on just that team. So he's a guy that plays off the ball in a role you'd kind of expect to see really from Isaiah Livers in a lot of ways. He does a lot of the same things. He's nowhere near the caliber of shooter that Livers is, but he can knock down shots. He can really attack a closeout and get to the basket. He's a really good finisher, which is interesting for a couple of reasons. One, he's a poor finisher in transition, but he's great in the half court, and I think that comes down to his strength and body control around the basket. He didn't have a single dunk last year, which you wouldn't really expect to see from a guy you're talking about playing the 3 or the 4, but he finishes through contact, draws fouls, makes free throws. So he's just really a solid, I think, rotation caliber. Mm-hmm. Forward, wing, however you want to describe him.
Yeah, isn't a shooter, but you have to respect him. You can't just completely sag off him. He can hit a corner 3. I think he made 43 threes as a sophomore playing a full season. Averaged just under 1 make a game last year, but certainly more of a standstill. If his feet are set, you have to close out on him, essentially. But he's not going to make anything off the bounce, but that's really not his game. But I still think Isaiah Livers returns to Michigan next year. If he doesn't, though, this addition is enormous. And if Isaiah Livers is back, then I think it's a strong possibility you still see Chaundee Brown starting at the 2, or what you would say is the 2. He's not a traditional shooting guard like you said, but I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility. You would see a starting lineup of Eli Brooks, Chaundee Brown. That's if he gets a waiver. We'll touch on that. But Eli Brooks, Chaundee Brown, Franz Wagner, Isaiah Livers, and Hunter Dickinson or Austin Davis. You agree? Disagree?
So I think he's one of your 5 best players
20,
in that
20
scenario.
3 minutes a game. Sound
I
right?
don't see, with that lineup you just listed off, who is handling the ball, who's creating shots, who like none of those guys are most comfortable dribbling. I think the answer is probably
There's only
Franz
like 2
Wagner.
guys on the team that even, or 3 guys on the team that even fit that category.
And none of them are in your starting lineup, really, right?
No, Eli and Franz and Mike Smith are basically the only guys on the team who really can do anything with the ball in their hands, right?
Yeah, so my idea or my point I was getting at was basically if you're going to slot him into the 2, would you rather slot someone into the 2 who might be able to do more of that playmaking, ball handling? Like, are you comfortable with a starting lineup where Eli Brooks is the only ball handler on the court? That's where you come into some of the balance. And there's going to be minutes to play there, but it's going to be about who would slide into the 2, what Franz Wagner can really do from the 2.
Mm-hmm.
I think Chaundee Brown, you're going to be a lot more comfortable with him guarding 3s and 4s than 2s.
Yep.
I think he's probably more equipped to guard 2s than Isaiah Livers, but I don't know that you're really excited about that from a defensive setup necessarily.
Right. I think Chaundee gives them very functional versatility. Multiple positions he can fill. He can spell guys at multiple spots. He can defend multiple positions. He is experienced enough to, I think, step in and get it. Like, I don't think this is going to be a long, process of catching him up to speed. He's played 3 years of ACC basketball. This guy knows what he's doing. And, I watch his game. I like his game at the college level. And I really wonder what his college career would look like if he were in a situation other than Wake Forest, which was basically drained of talent year after year between departures and recruiting misses. And
I'd say talent on both ends of the bench.
Yeah, fair. Right.
The players weren't great, and the coaching staff never really got it in line.
Because if you remember, he was a big-time commit when he picked Wake Forest. He picked them over Kansas. At that time, Wake Forest was coming off an NCAA tournament appearance. I think it would have been Danny Manning's 3rd or 4th year. They went to the NCAA tournament, had some upward momentum going. Chaundee Brown commits over Kansas, right? Everything's looking good. And they haven't been able to keep a player ever since, essentially. And Chaundee Brown played 3 years of losing basketball. Probably not through much of his own fault, but what would he have looked like in a really good program?
Yeah,
probably would have been pretty good.
When you're bringing in a guy who was a top 40 recruit, obviously has ability, he has some of that pedigree, and he's just been in a trash situation for 3 years, you're going to at least expect to get some more upside out of that, right? Going from the worst defense in the ACC to playing on a competent defense, he should be able to do something more. I think you also have to mention some of the injury concerns that have maybe slowed him down a bit. He played his best basketball late in his sophomore year, and then sort of under the radar ended up getting surgery on his knee that offseason, and he had apparently played through it, but that limited him early in his junior year, and then he suffered 2 injuries that held him out, I think, 1 game in November and 6 games in January, but in both cases, talking with people who followed that team, he was limited on the court in the 4 or 5 games after them. And I think you have to adjust for some of that as far as his health. He had a torn calf muscle or something like that in January, which can't be that easy to come back. I mean, you just look at Michigan last year. Isaiah Livers was not the same guy when he came back. So getting healthy and being able to get up to speed and potentially play this year, I think you can expect him to maybe be a little more explosive, a little quicker, just get back to some of who you might have thought he was earlier in his career.
And worth noting, like on the drop-off due to the injuries, you can see it right in the numbers. Everything just falls kind of off a cliff where he was trending pretty well early on, and then obviously a good year was disrupted. But he did come back late in the year and have some really good showings. Put up 24 points on 8 of 12 shooting and had 9 rebounds in a double overtime win against Duke. Kind of proved what he can look like relatively healthy. So, yeah, I mean, what would have last year looked like if he stayed healthy the whole time? I don't know. I think it would certainly look like a different pickup for Michigan. Statistically, it would probably grab people a little bit more. Even still, he averaged 12 points a game in the ACC.
Yeah, and of note, they went 1-6 in the ACC when he was out. Now, they didn't win a lot of games all season, but that's still a pretty notable streak, at least as far as some of his impact on that team. I have a hard time seeing his offense. To me, looks pretty defined as far as what he does and playing off the ball, attacking closeouts. I don't know if I see a big future as far as he's already played 3 years of college basketball and is not a ball dominant player. So I have a hard time seeing him expand some of that to an extreme degree, but I guess it's possible in Michigan's system. Do you see him playing mostly as he's played, sort of off the catch, playing off the wing, attack a bad closeout, get fouled at the rim, or do you see him more as a secondary or primary ball handler in Michigan's system?
No, I wouldn't see it as ball handling. No, I would see it more as catch, attack, slash. He is more than capable of catching the ball, going 3 dribbles to the basket, and getting to the rim. But playing out of a ball screen and making a decision is a completely different deal. I haven't seen any passing. Didn't even bother to look up any clips of what he looks like passing the ball. But I don't see that being his game. I think he's an attacker. I think he's a guy who has a nose for the basket. I love the fact that he plays for contact and is a guy who can shoot 85% from the free throw line and also grab 6 rebounds a game. He grabbed over 9 rebounds a game per 40 minutes last year. That's a really good asset to have, especially for a team that you're not really sure what they're going to look like in terms of creating open shots.
Yeah, the fact that he shoots over 80% from the free throw line consistently every year makes me think that he probably has some untapped jump shooting ability that you would at least think maybe could come out in a more perimeter-oriented offense. It's also notable to me, though, that he didn't attempt a single off-the-dribble 3 all season. So he'll attempt an off-the-dribble jumper, but it's almost always kind of that one dribble pull-up from 18 feet more than any sort of like off-the-dribble 3-point shot.
I tend to think that's okay as long as you know what you're getting yourself into. Just based on 1 year of watching this staff deal with the talent that was there, I didn't really see. I can't think of very few examples where anyone was asked to do anything outside of their skill set. And I do feel like this will, whatever's drawn up for Chaundee Brown will fit with what he is capable of doing.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think the question would be, is there someone on Michigan's roster who can create plays to the point where Chaundee Brown is in the position to get the ball and do something, right? Michigan was able to put guys in great spots so often because Xavier Simpson could get the ball to the right spots, could break down defenses. That's not a given at this point right now. And that's probably the one. Michigan's seems like every week we're doing another addition, subtraction, transfer, commitment, decommitment, whatever podcast. But that's really the one area that, Michigan's addressed it. Mike Smith is a guy who will be asked to do some of that. It's just a question mark. How effective is he doing it at this level? And we can go and watch him play against Ivy League teams forever, but you're just not going to know until the lights turn on next season, right? So that's the question. I think you would look at Chaundee's commitment as a bit of a you would kind of downgrade Terrence Williams' role going forward. I think they can do a lot of the same things, and it's going to be a little harder for Terrence Williams to find the court. Mm-hmm. Certainly this year, if Chaundee Brown is eligible, right? They're both guys that love to isolate from 17 feet and face up. They're kind of in between positions. But Chaundee Brown is going to be way ahead of anything you'd get from Terrence Williams at this point, just because he's a grown man who's played 3 years in the ACC.
Yeah, you brought up eligibility. This is a big question here. Everyone I've talked to about this, I have said I don't see what the precedent is for this kid getting a waiver. As we talked about, he entered the transfer portal and entered the NBA draft 10 days before Danny Manning was fired as Wake Forest head coach. So he was already transferring and exploring a pro option. You know, when Kentucky got the commitment from Oliver Sarr, is it Sarr? Am I pronouncing that correctly? Sarr?
I'm sure people want to know this is where they'll come.
Sarr?
I think Sarr.
Sarr, okay. From Oliver Sarr, like, you saw the big hubbub immediately. You know, that when coaches get fired, it is rarely equated to waivers for players transferring from the program in those instances. So, you know, that was a scenario where, man, it might be hard for this kid to get a waiver from the NCAA. That was with a guy who transferred after Danny Manning was fired and after Steve Forbes was hired. Now, in Chaundee Brown's case, he obviously left the program 10 days before Manning was fired. He did wait, though, until after Steve Forbes came aboard and they could meet to decide to actually leave the program. So, unless there's a waiver case that we're not thinking of, and you're going to try to tie it to the situation in Wake Forest coaching change, really the only case you can make is that when he was going to transfer, he was leaving the option open to return to Wake Forest. And when the coaching change occurred, that eliminated that option. And between that and just hoping that because of the situation with the pandemic and all the uncertainty out there, that the NCAA is just going to be ultra liberal in giving out waivers. Outside of that, I mean, hey, Michigan got a waiver for Shea Patterson, so, you know, the compliance office knows what they're doing. It's a little bit of a stretch to just assume that this is a foregone conclusion, right?
Yeah, I don't think you can really assume anything with the transfer waiver process. It seems like every time you think you know what's going to happen, it'll throw you a little curveball surprise. It's not necessarily the most consistent process, which is why everyone's so frustrated and upset with it, right? I think one of the reasons that you could probably think he has a chance is just when there could be who knows what going on in a program where a coach is about to get fired. He could have been told something that he wouldn't be fired. Like, you don't know, like that sort of thing could always come into play, I would say. And if you could come up with some case that you were misled or something like that, who knows in that sense. There's obviously the COVID-19 factor weighing into things, and I wouldn't be shocked if like lots of waivers are approved that maybe we wouldn't necessarily expect to be approved. And if they just come up with kind of a quiet way to handle it while not causing a run on all transfers, but just sort of quietly push these transfers through, would that really be that shocking at this point? They've kind of come out and said they have unilateral authority to just do whatever they want with waivers, and that's what they basically admitted when they were deciding, well, we can vote on it and we can just change the waiver criteria without changing the rules, which, like, okay, this seems like a bit of a stretch, right? So who knows what will happen with the waiver. It seems like everyone thinks they're getting a waiver no matter where they're going. The other factor, if Kentucky is politicking pretty hard for Olivier Sarr to get a waiver, that could have a net effect on Brown's waiver getting approved, just because the factors would at least line up in some similar form.
Would be really hard to give it to one and not the other.
Yes, and you can.
It would be a tough look. Yeah,
and John Calipari is going to be out there.
Oh yeah,
campaigning for that waiver to be approved.
And because frankly, if Sarr doesn't get the waiver, by all accounts, he won't be at Kentucky. He's not a sit-out guy. He's just going to move on. Without having spoken to Chaundee Brown, I don't think that's out of the possibility either.
I mean,
if he's a sit one, play one, I don't know if it's for certain that all aboard the train for sitting one to play one. It might be don't get a waiver, moves on and goes and pursues the pro option. That's not out of the realm of possibility here either.
Yeah, and there's just so much uncertainty. At what point do you, if the season's getting delayed and it's your sit out and you have to sit out and you could just go play professionally, there's just so much, there's going to be a lot of moving pieces as far as that kind of decision goes for a long time, right? I mean, if even seniors this year anywhere, when do you decide what's going on with this season if it ends up getting delayed or whatever else? So that's an incredibly complicated situation, especially because it's not like you can go to the NBA at that point. You're out, you don't have that many options to just, I'm not sure people are going to be lining up to sign Chaundee Brown to a European deal.
Right.
He's a good ACC player. He's not an all-league guy, right?
Right.
So he might be frustrated with it, but I don't know what situation or option you really have. I do think that leads to kind of a overarching thing of signing 2 sit one, play one transfers is an interesting approach considering the circumstances. I think
they haven't signed anyone.
Correct. But recruiting multiple sit one, play one transfers in a situation where obviously you could fit Chaundee Brown into the following season's team quite easily. He'd be a perfect building block for a team when you're really starting from scratch. Mm-hmm. But you also run the risk of, if some of these situations don't end up how you want them, if you're banking on a waiver, it doesn't come through, you maybe didn't get enough depth in the door for the immediate near term in this upcoming season. So that approach is interesting, and there's still a lot to know how it'll play out.
Right. Which kind of brings us here to Nojel Eastern. We obviously had the podcast last week talking about his addition and what it means and what it would look like if he plays this year, what it would look like if he plays in 2021-22. 5 days later, it's now Tuesday. There's been no official announcement from the athletic department about his addition. From sources that I've talked to, he is not enrolled in the university, and his addition is, I was told, a ongoing process that's not close to being completed. So there is not clarity here on if he is joining the program or not. Everyone remembers, he announced his transfer from Purdue on Tuesday of last week and announced by Thursday that he was going to Michigan. It was a oddly fast process that now seems a little more muddled than it did previously.
He also is still in the NBA draft.
Correct.
Which a lot of transfers enter the NBA draft and the transfer portal, but before they commit, they usually end up withdrawing from the NBA draft.
Right.
I believe Chaundee Brown was in the NBA draft and has withdrawn from the NBA draft.
I don't know if did he formally withdraw? Did you see
I believe that could be incorrect. It's typical for that to happen, I feel like. That's just the normal step.
I love the Google machine typing in the background there. So there's no updated list on the NBA thing. It's either,
it's always the school you're at that announces you're withdrawing from the draft. And if there's no school you're in this sort of in-between state.
Yes. So Nojel Eastern by no means right now is a certain addition. And I'm not saying, this is not me saying, he's definitely not going to be part of the program. It's just, this is not it's not for sure that Chaundee Brown is taking the 13th scholarship and that Michigan has 2 possible sit one, play one, or one guy who could be eligible and the other couldn't be eligible, or neither gets their waiver. I mean, there's just so much. Like, what the hell is going on? And it's May 19th, and this is going to have to figure itself out. Shit, we don't even know when next season's going to be. So, I don't know how. It's really hard to feel sorry for very well-paid coaches, but it is tough being a coach in these circumstances, because it's like week to week, where shit just goes sideways, basically, and you don't know what you're recruiting for at this point.
Yeah, and the NBA draft is completely up in there.
Still don't even have a withdrawal date for the draft.
So Michigan could have 3 players eligible next year for 3 of its 13 scholarships. It could have 10. It could have 2 sit-out guys. It could have just 10. Like, there's just so much uncertainty, and those are 3 guys that, for whatever it's worth, would change what you think about Michigan by quite a bit, right?
Yeah.
Like 3 guys who are all good enough to be Big Ten rotation players on a roster that's maybe a little short on guys who are good enough to be Big Ten rotation players, at least proven right now. So a lot of uncertainty still, without a doubt. I mean, we're going to have to see how it all shakes out. And even if you get some sort of clarity on transfers happening or not happening, you're not going to have any clarity on eligibility unless there's some sort of announcement. I mean, I believe the NCAA is still voting on that tomorrow. Is that correct?
Yeah, no one expects it to pass.
No, but they're going to have to say something.
Sure.
And then we're going to have to get more clarity. I'm sure there are people who still expect it to pass, who are in the transfer portal.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like, yeah. Or people who transferred because they expected it to pass.
Yeah. Yes. But, I mean, it's just unbelievable the way that everything has happened. It was, 9 weeks ago today that Michigan was in Indianapolis. Season still going. People wondering how their scholarship total was going to work out. People worrying about them being over the scholarship count. Since then, Xavier Simpson, John Teskey graduate. Cole Bajema transfers to Washington. Colin Castleton transfers to Florida. David DeJulius transfers to Cincinnati. Mike Smith comes aboard from Columbia. Isaiah Livers enters the draft. Nojel Eastern potentially transfers from Purdue. Chaundee Brown transfers from Wake Forest. It's just a good lesson, I think, in not jumping the shark when it comes to roster fears or presumptions.
Yeah, and it's just it's going to be, I mean, I think part of Michigan being so involved in the transfer portal is if you swing and miss at 5-star recruits who take you down late in the process, right? Isaiah Todd, Josh Christopher, those decisions, you wouldn't have to be nearly as active in the transfer portal if those had played out differently, right? So by waiting out those decisions that almost always are going to take you into April, at least, that's going to sometimes lead you in this filling in the gaps sort of situation.
Yeah.
Who would you rather have on next year's roster, Eastern or Brown, as an immediately eligible transfer?
Chaundee Brown. I think he gives you more.
Would you prefer one or the other on the following year's roster?
That's a good question. I think you could make a better case for Eastern there, but I'd probably still take Chaundee Brown.
I think you'd rather have Chaundee Brown as a sit one because he'll fit with just about anyone. Mm-hmm. And I think you'd rather just, especially if Isaiah Livers is back, I think that's the swing factor, right?
Sure.
If Isaiah Livers leaves, you need Brown tomorrow as an eligible player. If he's back, he's more of a luxury to me.
I think that's correct.
If Isaiah Livers is back, Nojel Eastern, I think, could make Michigan a significantly better team because there are the pieces around him to make his strengths and weaknesses work.
I'll co-sign on all that. Yeah. I mean, on one hand, Nojel Eastern isn't a guy you really are able to build around on a team just because of his offensive limitations. So when you look at that 2021-22 team, really what is he? He has to be surrounded by shooters to be valuable. So this would be the year to have him if it's one or the other, right? You put him out there with Franz Wagner, Isaiah Livers, and a combination of Eli Brooks, Mike Smith. Okay, you can play around his shortcomings. If he's out there with a bunch of guys and there's no Livers, there's no Franz Wagner, you're rebuilding. Who knows what it looks like? It might be a little hard to have a guy who struggles to put the ball in the basket outside of 5 feet. So, yeah, I think you nailed it. I think that's a good point.
Yeah, and obviously Isaiah Livers, the big swing factor still in all that. So,
you have any feeling either way right now?
On Isaiah Livers, look, I mean, if you're going to go after a guy who plays a lot like Isaiah Livers, it makes me think that there's probably a chance that there's some risk there. It's just so much uncertainty in how long this process will even go. I mean, what is your read on the Livers situation?
I think that I see the math that you're talking about there when it comes to Chaundee and the fit. I just think internally they see him more as that power guard, as you referred to, who's kind of filling a spot in addition to him, as opposed to a replacement spot, and if you have both, great. And yeah, if you get surprised and Liver stays in the draft, it's huge to have him for sure.
Yeah, I don't think, based on what's out there on the transfer portal, it's not like Brown wouldn't fit with Livers. Between what you can choose from, it makes sense to prioritize him. He's going to be a more winning player than like a Jalen Coleman Lands would. Yeah. So I can see the fit in that sense too. It feels like a situation where Isaiah Livers is looking for a reason to stay in the draft. So it just will come down to whether he gets that reason, if you ask me.
Mm-hmm. I'll still be surprised if it happens. That's just me. That's me. Yeah. All right. We got anything else?
I don't think so. I'll make sure there's no breaking news in the 30 minutes we record this podcast. But other than that, quick little transfer podcast again.
As you say, give the people what they want, right? All right. We're going to wrap it on that. We appreciate everyone listening. Share this podcast with your friends who are like-minded college basketball folks looking for any content that they can get in May. And subscribe to UM Hoops, subscribe to The Athletic, and grab yourself a takeout dinner tonight from your local restaurant.